Inside every prosthetic joint I've ever built, there's a mark no bigger than a grain of rice, my own initials, engraved by hand, hidden where no one thinks to look. I never told my husband it was there. At our clinic's 10th anniversary gala, in front of 200 investors and colleagues, Julian raised his glass, called his prosthetic design his own invention, then found me in the crowd and laughed, thanks to the girl who carves plastic legs in the garage. The room laughed with him. I smiled. I asked for the projector. What came up wasn't memories. It was dated photographs, my sketches, my first prototypes years before his clinic had a name. Then a man I hadn't seen in years stood, rolled up his pant leg, and showed the room that exact same mark, carved into a leg I built for him long before Julian claimed to invent anything. The microphone made his voice too big for the room. That's the first thing I noticed. Julian was standing under the chandelier at the Fairmont, glass raised, and the sound system carried every word into the corners where the caterers stood with their trays. 10 years ago, he said, I had an idea. Everyone told me it couldn't be built. 200 people leaned in. I was at table 9, near the kitchen doors, holding a champagne flute that had gone warm in my hand. I hadn't taken a sip. And I want to thank the people who made it real.
He found me then.
His eyes swept the room and landed on me like he'd been looking the whole time. Including, and she'll kill me for this, the girl who carves plastic legs in the garage.
The room laughed.
Not a polite laugh. A warm one, the kind people give when they think they're being let in on something charming. Trevor Lance laughed. 2 women from the medical board laughed. Someone at the next table said, the way you would about a golden retriever. I set the flute down. I smiled because that is what my face does. 2 decades of marriage teaches your face things your chest hasn't agreed to. Let me back up, because you should know what his hands can and can't do. Julian is a surgeon. Good ones are rare, and he is good, steady, precise, wonderful at the part where you close a patient up and tell them it will be all right. But Julian has never in his life laid up a laminate. He has never mixed resin at 2 in the morning with the garage door cracked, so the fumes don't put him under. He doesn't know the smell, sharp and sweet, like nail polish and something burning far away, that lived in my hair for years. I do. I'm a prosthetist. I build limbs. I met him in 2003 at a rehab unit in Fresno where I was the technician nobody addressed by name. He was a resident then, 30, broke, driving a Corolla with a coat hanger for an antenna. He'd stand in my little fitting room and watch me work and ask real questions, and I mistook curiosity for partnership. That was the first mistake, and it was mine. The leg came later. Our leg, that's what I called it in my head for a long time. I built the first prototype in the garage of the house we rented on Delano Avenue. I remember the wooden stool that wobbled, the shop light clamped to a shelf, the socket taking shape in my hands over weeks. It walked better than anything on the market. It let the ankles store energy and give it back, so a baloney amputee could climb a curb without thinking. I knew it the first time I flexed a test socket and felt it answer. And I did something on that first one that I did on every single one after. Inside the joint, in the hollow where nobody ever looks, I engraved a mark by hand. A capital R set into the teeth of a small gear. My initial, my trade. No bigger than a grain of rice. You'd need to open the joint and know exactly where to hold it to the light. I never told Julian it was there. I told myself it was a craftsman's habit, the way old luthiers sign the inside of a violin. I know now it was something else. Some part of me was signing what I already sensed I might have to prove. There was a second habit, quieter. Every time a design changed, I photographed it, the sketch, the mold, the finished socket, and let the camera stamp the date into the corner. I have thousands of them. I told Julian it was for insurance. It was just not the kind either of us meant. By the time the clinic opened in 2016, the leg had a name, and the name was his. The Cole Dynamic Ankle. When the brochures came, I saw my work on glossy paper under a photograph of my husband in a white coat, arms crossed. I remember standing in our kitchen with the brochure, turning on the faucet, turning it off. I told myself a family builds things together. A wife stands behind her husband. What's a name? I believed that. I want you to understand, I believed it completely, the way you believe a floor will hold you. Back at table 9, Julian was still talking, thanking the investors, thanking the board, and the caterer set a plate in front of me I don't remember ordering. I watched him accept the room's affection for a thing he could not have built if his life depended on it, and I understood, all at once and very calmly, what my silence had been used for. Not shared.
Erased.
He hadn't hidden me behind him. He'd hidden me under him. Under a garage, under a joke, and everyone had agreed to look away. I clapped when the room clapped. I drove home alone because he stayed for the after-party. And at 11 that night, I went into the closet, took down a shoebox, and plugged in an old external drive I hadn't touched in years. The little light blinked green. The folders opened, every one of them, sorted by date. He thought he'd wiped all of this. He hadn't. I still had everything. The coffee was already made when I came down at 7. Julian had set 2 mugs on the island, mine on the left the way he always did, the handle turned toward me. He was in his good weekend sweater, the gray one, reading something on his tablet with his glasses pushed up into his hair. "Morning," he said, not looking up. "You slept in." I hadn't slept at all. I'd sat in the garage on Delano until 3 with the old drive humming on the bench, but I said, a little. Big night. Trevor was thrilled. He turned a page with his thumb. He wants to move fast on the raise. Which reminds me. He slid a folder across the granite. It was thick, maybe 40 pages, and the paper had that heavy cream weight lawyers use, so you feel the seriousness of it in your fingers. A tab on the side said Intellectual Property Assignment. There was a little flag where a signature line waited. "Just housekeeping," he said. "For the deal structure. Sign it, and we can stop thinking about it." I picked it up. I did not sit down. I stood at the counter with the coffee going cold, and I read, because reading is the one thing I have always been good at that he never gave me credit for. The first pages were boilerplate. Definitions. Recitals. Then I found the sentence I was looking for, on page 9, in a paragraph that ran too long on purpose. All right, title, and interest in the device commercially known as the Cole Dynamic Ankle, including any and all prior, current, and future iterations, prototypes, and derivative works, shall vest solely and permanently in Julian Cole and Cole Rehabilitation. I read it twice. Then I set the folder down flat and squared its edges against the counter. "It says permanently," I said. "That's just the word they use. It says prior iterations. Prototypes." I kept my voice at the temperature of the room. "The prototypes are from 2011, Julian. Before there was a clinic to assign anything to." For the first time, he looked at me over the glasses that weren't even on his eyes. "Why are you reading it like a contract?" "It is a contract. It's a formality." He set the tablet down. The soft click of it on stone. "Trevor's fund has rules about clean IP. He can't put 9 figures into something where the ownership is a family art project. You understand that?" 9 figures. He said it the way other men say the weather. I filed the number away somewhere behind my teeth. "Then let's put both names on it," I said. "Co-inventors. That's clean too." The kitchen got very quiet. The refrigerator cycled on, that low hum, and I heard him breathe out through his nose.
"Thank."
He said my name like an adult correcting a child who's proud of the wrong thing. "I know you did the fabrication. Nobody's taking that from you. You're good with your hands. You've always been good with your hands." He picked up his mug and didn't drink from it. "But the concept, the biomechanics, the vision, the reason any of it exists, that came from me. You were the hands. I was the idea. Ideas are what people invest in." I looked at him. Since 2003, I had looked at that face, since the year we met when he was 30 and still a resident, and I understood that I had been looking at a man who had rehearsed that exact sentence, maybe for years, waiting for the morning he'd need it. You were the hands. I was the idea. I didn't argue. That was the first decision I made that morning, and I want to be honest about why. It wasn't strength. It was arithmetic. You don't show a man your cards while he's still counting his own. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "Okay. I hear you." I picked the folder back up and held it against my chest like it mattered to me, which it did, though not the way he thought. "This is a lot of pages for coffee. Let me read it properly. I don't sign things I haven't read, you taught me that." He almost smiled. He liked being quoted back to himself. Of course. Take the weekend. I carried the folder upstairs. I did not read it again. I opened a blank page in my notebook, the paper kind, no cloud, no trace, and at the top I wrote a single word, have. And under it I began a list. The drive with the dated photographs. The maker's mark, the R inside the gear, hidden in the ankle joint of every unit I'd ever built, including ones that walked around this city on other people's bodies. Marcus. His name I wrote and circled twice because Marcus had the first leg, the real first one, still using it out of a rehab unit in Fresno years ago and using it now. I was 3 lines in when Julian's voice came up the stairs, light, almost tender, the way he sounds right before he closes. Sign it before Friday, Ren. Aldervent wants to buy us, and I'm not letting you blow this up. I stopped writing. The pen stayed on the paper. Aldervent. He had no idea that I already knew that name or that by Friday they would know mine. I found Aldervent's number the way I found most things that mattered in my life, at a workbench, alone, past midnight. Their main line went to voicemail, but their research division had a direct extension listed on a conference abstract from 2019, a paper on socket load distribution that, when I read it 2 years ago, had made me set down my coffee. Whoever wrote it understood something most engineers didn't. I dialed it at 8:00 for the next Monday from the garage, with the space heater ticking beside me. A woman answered on the second ring. Priya Nair. My name is Renata Cole, I said. I make prosthetic limbs. I think we should talk. There was a pause. Not a confused one. A careful one. Cole, she repeated. As in the Cole dynamic ankle. As in the person who built it. The pause came back longer. Then, where are you? I'll come to you. She drove up from Fresno 2 days later and met me not at the garage but at a diner off Shaw, a place with laminated menus and a coffee pot that never stopped moving. She was already in the booth when I arrived, a leather folio squared to the table edge. 45, silver at the temples, hands folded like a woman who did not fidget. I've been watching your husband's device for 6 years, she said, before I'd sat all the way down. His device. That's the interesting word, isn't it? She turned the folio toward me and opened it. Inside were photographs, not mine, technical ones. Cross-sections. Cutaway diagrams of the Cole dynamic ankle, printed from Julian's own promotional materials, annotated in the margins in tight blue pen. We tore one down, she said. Legally. We bought a unit through a clinic in Sacramento and our engineers reverse-engineered it. Standard competitive practice. She tapped a spot on the diagram, a joint housing near the heel. This bevel here. Nobody designs this. It costs more to machine, and it does nothing structural. It only makes sense if the person who made it was fitting it by hand, over and over on a patient with a specific gait. It's a fingerprint of a maker, not an inventor. I looked at the bevel. I remembered filing it. I remembered why. There was a patient, I said. Early. He rolled through his step. The stock geometry caught him every time. So I cut it back. Priya nodded slowly, like something she'd suspected for years had just sat down across from her and confirmed its own name. Julian Cole has never, in any lecture I've seen, been able to explain that bevel. He calls it proprietary refinement. She almost smiled. A surgeon doesn't file a bevel at 2 a.m. because a stranger limps. A maker does. The coffee came. Neither of us touched it. I'll say it plainly, she said. Aldervent will open a lab. Your name on the door. Your name on the product. Design authority. A real budget. Your own bench. We've wanted a hand like yours for a decade, and we've been buying it secondhand through your husband. She let that land. But I'm not going to insult you with a promise I can't keep. So here's the wall. She closed the folio. Right now, everything I have proves that someone with hands built that ankle. It doesn't prove those hands were yours. In a room full of lawyers, your husband will stand up and say the most dangerous sentence he can say. She looked at me. He'll say you stole it from him, that you were his technician, that any sketch you have is work for hire, that you're a bitter wife rewriting history because the marriage failed. I set my hands flat on the table. I have photographs. Dated. Dated by whom? On a hard drive you control? He'll say you backdated them last week. She wasn't being cruel. She was being the room I would eventually have to stand in. I need something he cannot argue with. Not a sketch you could have drawn yesterday. Not a file you could have edited. Something in the world, outside your reach, that carries a date he can't touch. I thought about the little R inside the gear wheel, cut into brass, buried in the joint of every leg I ever made, small enough that you had to know it was there. Something in the world. Something outside my reach. There might be, I said slowly, a mark. A mark where? Inside the ankle, under the shell. I put it there, on everything. Priya went very still. How far back? Before the clinic. Before he ever said the word invention. She reached into the folio one more time and drew out a single sheet, not a diagram this time. A photocopy of an old intake form, the kind clinics keep and forget. She turned it toward me and put one finger under a name near the top, printed the year before Julian's clinic even had a lease on the building. We pulled early field records too, she said quietly. Patients who received a device matching your geometry before 2016. There's one from 2011. First fitting on record. The first person to ever walk on your design. She held my eyes. You know him. He might still have the leg. I looked down at the name under her finger. Marcus Bell. The address Priya had for him was 2 years old, but the VA counselor I reached on Tuesday morning gave me a current one without much fuss, once I said I'd built his first leg. A duplex in Clovis, brown lawn, a wheelchair ramp somebody had sanded and never painted. I stood on the porch holding a manila folder against my chest like it could stop my heart from doing what it was doing. He opened the door before I knocked twice. You're the one from the messages, he said. Not a question. He was bigger than I remembered, gray coming into the beard, and he was standing on it, the leg. My leg. I knew the gait before I knew his face. Marcus. It's Renata. Something moved across his eyes. He stepped back and held the door. Come in before the cat gets out. The living room smelled like coffee and WD-40. He walked me to the kitchen, and I watched the ankle load and release, that little pause at toe-off I'd spent 11 weeks in 2011 chasing. 15 years. It was still doing exactly what I'd asked it to. You still walk on it every day, I said. I've got a spare in the closet the VA keeps pushing. Newer. Lighter. He pulled out a chair, the legs scraping on the linoleum. I don't wear it. Feels like somebody borrowed my body and gave it back wrong. He sat. This one feels like mine. I set the folder down and didn't open it yet. Can I ask you something that's going to sound strange? Everything sounded strange since 2009. He almost smiled. Go ahead. Would you let me look at the joint? The medial cover. I need to check something inside it. He didn't ask why. He just reached down, rolled the cuff of his sweatpants above the knee, and worked the socket loose with the ease of a man who'd done it 40,000 times. He handed the whole thing across the table like passing bread. My hands knew the weight before my eyes did. I turned it, found the seam where the shell met the housing, and pressed my thumbnail into the release the way you have to press it, a specific way, a way I never wrote down for anyone. The cover popped. There it was, inside the joint, stamped into the aluminum where no patient would ever see it and no imitator would ever think to look. An R, folded into a gear tooth.
Meaning?
Cut by my own hand at a bench on Delano Avenue a year and a half before Julian's clinic opened its doors. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just breathed. You found what you came for, Marcus said quietly. You have no idea. I reseated the cover, felt the click, handed it back. Marcus, that mark is why I'm here. There's a man, a doctor, who's telling investors and a medical board that he invented this. That I was, at most, the person who assembled his idea. He built a whole clinic on it. The Cole dynamic ankle. His name. Marcus went still in the way that men who've been shot go still.
Cole.
That's your name. It's his too. I let that sit. For now. He looked down at the leg he'd just put back on. When he spoke, his voice had dropped somewhere I hadn't heard it go. You know what I was before this? I was a guy who didn't get out of a chair for 11 months. My daughter learned to walk while I couldn't. You handed me this thing in a garage. I remember the garage, the fan, the paint cans, and you said, "Stand up slow, I've got you." And I stood up. He tapped the shell. This isn't a device. Don't let him call it a device. I had a speech ready. I didn't use it. Would you be willing to say that? Somewhere it matters. Where's it matter? A lawyer's office. A deposition. A quiet room where…
No.
He said it flat. Not a quiet room. He leaned back and the chair complained under him. I did 4 years of quiet rooms with the VA. You know what quiet rooms are for? For making the thing go away, without anybody having to look at it. The truth hid inside a quiet room is just like that mark hid inside the joint. Nobody sees it, so nobody has to owe you anything. He shook his head. If I say it in front of the whole room. The people writing him checks. I want to watch their faces. I felt the plan I'd been building shift under me and settle into something harder, something with a shape. In front of the whole room. I hadn't dared want that. He'd wanted it for me. There's a gala, I heard myself say. In a few weeks. Investors. The board. Then that's where. He stood, testing his weight, that old, faithful ankle taking it. I'll roll up my pant leg for anybody who wants proof. Let them read your name off my knee. I gathered the folder. My throat was doing something I didn't have a word for. At the door, he put a hand on the frame and stopped me. One thing, Marcus said. You made this a year and a half before his clinic even existed. So, who else got one? He tilted his head. Am I the only one walking around on your work, or are there others? I opened my mouth to answer, and the answer stopped me cold on his brown lawn. The first patients. A dozen of them, maybe more. Every record, every fitting date, every serial, sitting on the clinic's server. Behind a login I no longer had. The parking lot behind the clinic still had my code, or so I hoped. I didn't test it. Instead, I sat in my car on a Tuesday morning, watching the staff entrance, waiting for one person. Dana Okafor always arrived at 7:40. She parked in the same spot, third from the dumpster, and she always sat in her car for exactly 4 minutes before going in. I had seen her do it 100 times over the years, and never once wondered why. That morning I understood. 4 minutes is how long it takes to decide you can stand a place one more day. I knocked on her passenger window. She flinched, then rolled it down. Renata. Her coffee steamed against the cold glass. You're not supposed to be here. I know. Julian said you're taking some time. Is that the word he used? I didn't make it a question. Can I sit for a second? She looked at the clinic door, then unlocked mine. I got in. The car smelled like cinnamon gum and old paper. On her lap was a folder she didn't put away, and I noticed she didn't put it away. I need the intake records, I said. The device fittings. 2011 through 2013. The ones on the old server. She laughed, one short breath through her nose. You want me to pull patient files? For you. So you can what? Sue him. So, I can prove when the first ankle was built. He built it. You know he didn't, Dana. She was quiet. Outside, a nurse walked past with a tray and didn't look at us. Dana turned her coffee slowly in both hands, watching the surface move.
10 years, she said.
I ran this office for 10 years. I did the billing when we couldn't make payroll. I sat with families when they cried in the waiting room. You know what he told me in 2018? She looked at me for the first time. That when we incorporated the second entity, I'd get 4%. Founding staff. He put it in an email. I still have the email. And the paperwork came, and my name wasn't in it, and when I asked, he said the investors needed a cleaner cap table. Her jaw moved. A cleaner cap table. That's what I was. A smudge. I didn't say anything. Some doors you don't push. You just stand where the person can see you standing. She set the coffee in the cup holder. You always knew about the little mark, didn't you? The one in the joint. I went cold, then very steady. What mark? Don't. She almost smiled. I filed the warranty returns. I saw the inside of these things when nobody else did.
There's a letter in there.
An R. She turned it in the air with one finger, curled into a gear. 14 years I had hidden that stamp so well that Julian himself never found it, and the office manager had been looking at it since 2011. How long have you known? I said. That it was yours? She shrugged. I didn't know it was yours. I knew it wasn't his. He can't hold a scalpel steady enough to sign his own charts. He was never going to bevel anything by hand. She reached down, opened the folder, and I saw printed sheets, rows of dates. I started backing things up the week the email disappeared from the shared drive. Not for you. For me. In case I ever needed to remind someone I existed. Can I see? She didn't hand it over. She held it against her chest and typed something on her phone with her thumb. One-handed, the folder still pressed there. There's a system log, she said, eyes on the screen. Device record creation timestamps. Not the fitting date, the actual moment somebody first opened a file and typed the ankle specs in. Marcus Bell's record was created March 4th, 2011. His first fitting wasn't until 11 weeks later. And the clinic's business license, she flipped her phone toward me, issued August 2016. The cold dynamic ankle existed in our own database 5 years before the company that supposedly invented it. My photograph of that first sketch had a date stamp in the corner. February 2011. I had taken it in the garage on Delano, with the plastic still warm off the mold. 3 weeks before Marcus's file was ever opened. The two dates lined up like teeth in a gear. I have a picture from before that. I heard myself say. The design's in my hand.
February.
The year before the prototype. I was already drawing it. Dana looked at me for a long moment. Then she did something I didn't expect. She reached across, opened her glove box, took out a plain USB drive, and held it in her closed fist between us. System export, she said.
Creation logs.
Return records with the joint serials. Everything I saved that has that mark in it. Her hand didn't open. You understand this is my whole life. If they trace it back to me, I don't get another job in this county. I don't get a reference. I get nothing. I understand.
No.
She leaned in, and her voice dropped to almost nothing, so quiet the words barely crossed the 6 inches between us.
You don't yet.
She pressed the drive into my palm and folded my fingers over it with both hands, the way you'd close a wound. But if this ever breaks, I need your word my name stays out of it. And if you go back on that, Renata, I have another copy of every single thing on there. The USB was still warm in my pocket when I got Eleanor's call 2 days later. She didn't leave a message. She never did. Just a missed call at 6:12 in the evening, and then a text. Come for supper Thursday. Come alone. Julian is in Sacramento. I sat in my car in the pharmacy lot and read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove home the long way. Eleanor lived in the same house Julian grew up in, a low brick ranch off Van Ness with a lemon tree that had never once, in 20 years, produced a lemon you could eat. When I pulled in, the porch light was already on. She opened the door before I knocked. You look thin, she said, which was how she said hello. The house smelled like roast chicken and the particular lavender soap she'd used since before I met her son. She'd set 2 places at the kitchen table, not the dining room. That meant something. The dining room was for occasions. The kitchen was for truth. We ate for a while without talking about it. She asked about my mother, who has been dead for 11 years, and I answered as if she weren't, because Eleanor sometimes forgets, and correcting her costs more than it's worth. She told me the tree had bloomed and dropped everything again. Then she put down her fork. I watched him at that party, she said. On the little video Dana sent around. The toast. I kept my hands in my lap. He called you that name. She wasn't asking. In front of all those people. The men with the money. Eleanor stood. She's 72, and she stood the way people do when a knee has been replaced badly, both hands on the table edge, a small held breath. She went to the hall closet and came back carrying a hat box, the round kind, gray cardboard soft at the corners from age. She set it in front of me next to my plate. I've kept this since the winter Julian's father died, she said. 2009. You came here every Sunday that year. Do you remember what you did while you sat with me?
I did.
I drew. I always drew when I couldn't fix anything, and there was nothing to fix that winter, so I drew constantly. I lifted the lid. The smell came up first, old paper and pencil dust, and underneath it something that took the floor out from under me.
My own handwriting.
Sheet after sheet of graph paper. The good kind I used to buy in bulk, covered in ankle joints and cross-section. The dynamic hinge I'd been chasing for 2 years before it had any name at all. And in the corner of each one, in my hand, a date. February 2009. March 2009. And my signature, the full loop of it, Renata, back when I still signed things like they mattered. I turned them over slowly. On one, a note in my own writing to Eleanor. For your fridge. It actually walks now. I remembered giving it to her. I remembered she'd pinned it up next to a grocery list, and I'd laughed. He doesn't know these exist, Eleanor said. She sat back down. He never once looked in this box. Men don't look in their mother's closets. Why are you giving them to me now? She was quiet long enough that I heard the refrigerator cycle on. Because I know who built that leg, she said. I always knew. I sat right there and watched you do it on my kitchen table with a coffee can full of pencils. Her voice didn't rise. That was the thing about her, about both of us, I suppose. And I've watched him take it, piece by piece, and I said nothing because he is my son, and a mother's silence is a kind of love. But it stopped being love a while ago. It became the same silence you kept. I'd know it anywhere. I put the drawings back in the box very carefully, the way you'd handle something that could still cut you. I won't stand up in a room against my own child, Renata. I can't. I'm too old, and he's all I have left. Her hand found mine on the table, dry and cool. But you take the box. It's yours. It always was. I closed the lid. Do one thing for me. She held my eyes. Whatever you do with all this, don't let it turn you into the thing he became. He didn't start out a liar. He started out a man who wanted just a little more than he'd earned, and then a little more. Don't let winning teach you that. I promised her I wouldn't. I meant it sitting there. I've thought about that promise a great deal since. She walked me to the door with the box in my arms. On the porch, under that useless lemon tree, she caught my sleeve and lowered her voice to almost nothing, the way you speak when you're not sure the dark is empty. Renata, she whispered, be careful. He's already suspicious. He knows you've been meeting someone. The morning she called me, Dana didn't say hello. She said my name once, flat, like she was reading it off a form. Renata, I need you to lose my number. I was standing at the workbench with a heat gun in my hand. I set it down on the metal, away from the resin.
Dana.
Slow down. There's no slow down. Her voice dropped, and I could hear a door close on her end. He knows. I don't know how, but he pulled me into his office this morning and asked me straight out if I'd been in the archive logs. He was smiling the whole time. He offered me a raise, and then he mentioned my mortgage. My mortgage, Renata. I never told him where I bank. What did you do?
A pause.
The kind that answers before the words do. I deleted the export. The system log copy. I had to. If they audit the drive, and it's still there, she stopped. I still have the USB at home, but I can't hand it to anyone.
Not now. I'm sorry.
I really am. The line went dead before I could tell her I understood.
I didn't understand.
I stood there with a drive that proved March 4th, 2011, sitting in my pocket like a stone, and realized the paper trail I'd built was only as solid as the most frightened person holding it. That was Tuesday. By Thursday, it was worse, and it came from a direction I hadn't guarded. I found out from a colleague at the rehab unit in Fresno, a fitter named Owen who still owed me a favor from years back. He texted me a photo of a document header. United States Patent Application. Provisional. Filed under Julian Cole, MD device. Dynamic ankle foot assembly. Priority date stamped 9 days earlier. He'd filed first. He'd taken the thing I built with my hands in a rented garage on Delano, and he'd put his name on the front of it in federal ink. Now the burden was mine. I was the one who'd have to prove the timeline. I was the one who'd look like the thief coming late to steal back her own name. I read Owen's text twice. Then I set the phone face down and finished sanding the heel I'd been shaping. My hands were steady. That surprised me more than anything. Here's the part one hadn't seen coming, the part one keep turning over. It wasn't the patent that nearly finished me. It was the story. Trevor Lance called me Friday, 6:12 in the evening. I almost didn't pick up. His voice was careful, lawyerly, the voice of a man who has already decided what he thinks and is calling so he can say he called.
Renata.
I'm going to be direct with you, because I respect you. He did not respect me. Julian's told me you've been going through some things. That there's been some instability.
He's worried about you.
And now I'm hearing you've been meeting with people at Aldervent.
A breath.
I fund clean stories, Renata. My investors have compliance obligations you can't imagine. If there's a dispute inside this family, that's between you and your husband. But if you drag a competitor into a fraud claim you can't back up, you won't hurt Julian. You'll hurt yourself. Do you hear me? I hear you, Trevor. Good.
Get some rest.
He hung up. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the refrigerator hum.
Ghost.
Unstable. Jealous. He'd taken the truest thing about me, that I'd stayed quiet, that I'd stood behind Julian, and he'd inverted it into a symptom. The woman who never made noise for 20 years was now the hysterical one. It was almost elegant. I'd underestimated exactly how good he was at turning a victim into a saboteur. For 20 years I'd been the one holding the story he stood on, and now he was doing to me what I'd let him do to himself. Then Marcus called, and my stomach went to water. Renata. He sounded like a man choosing his words on a narrow ledge. I got a call from a lawyer today. Not yours. Said if I made any public statement about a medical device, I could be named in litigation. Said things about my disability benefits, whether they'd hold up if I got tangled in a fraud case. He exhaled. I'm not scared of much. You know that. But I've got a daughter, and I clawed my way to steady. I don't know if I can stand up in a room and be the guy who torched himself for somebody else's fight. I closed my eyes. Marcus.
You don't owe me anything.
You never did. That's the thing. His voice cracked, just slightly. I know I don't. That's why it's killing me.
Sleep on it, I said.
That's all. Just sleep on it. I sat in the garage that night with a single work lamp on and everything else dark. The half-finished ankle joint sat in the vise where I'd left it Tuesday, before the world tilted. I turned the lamp so the light raked across the inside of the socket, and there it was, small, deliberate, hidden where no one but a maker would think to look. The air laced into the gear. I'd been trying to win this on paper. Timelines and priority dates and system logs, all of it fragile, all of it deniable, all of it standing on people who could be frightened away in a single phone call. Paper could be forged,
filed, buried.
But a room full of people, watching a man roll up his trouser leg, that couldn't be unseen. I didn't need to beat Julian in a filing. I needed the whole room to look. The second gala was in 5 days. I started with the hard drive. 4 days out on a Sunday, I sat at the kitchen table with the old external drive plugged in and a legal pad beside it. I built a list, not a to-do list, an order of appearance. Photograph 1. My hand holding a pencil sketch, February 2011, the date stamped in the corner by a camera I no longer owned. Photograph 2. The first prototype clamped in the garage vise on Delano, sawdust on the bench. Photograph 3. The one that mattered, shot at 4 times magnification. They are folded into a gear, small as a grain of rice, sitting inside the ankle joint of the cold dynamic ankle like a secret nobody thought to look for. I laid Eleanor's sketches next to the screen, paper going soft at the folds. Her son's name nowhere on them. Mine signed in the bottom right 2009 in the loopy way I used to sign things before I learned to make myself smaller. Then I called Dana. She didn't pick up the first time. Or the second. On the third, she answered with the TV loud behind her. I can't, she said. Renata, I already told you. I deleted the export. I have a kid's braces to pay for. I'm not asking you to send me anything, I said. I'm asking you to come to Aldervent. With me. Priya wants an operations lead. It's yours if you want it. The USB stays in your pocket until you decide it doesn't. There was a long silence, just the TV. He gave my 4% to a man named Trevor Lance, she said finally. Did you know that? He put my name on the promise and Trevor's name on the shares. I know. I'll think about it. She hung up. But she'd said think, not no, and that was a different room than the one I'd started in. Marcus was harder. I drove to Clovis on Monday, and we sat on his porch while his daughter did homework inside. He wouldn't look at the leg. He kept both feet flat on the boards like he was holding the house down. Julian's lawyer called me twice, he said. Use my daughter's name in a sentence about defamation. You know what that does to a man.
Ido.
I want to help you.
Ido.
He rubbed his jaw. But I got a VA appeal in progress. I got a custody thing. I can't be the man who lost everything to help the woman who gave him his leg back.
I didn't argue.
I set my phone on the rail between us and played the audio Priya had sent me. The Aldervant technical review, a stranger's voice describing the hand-cut bevel, saying the phrase whoever built this was the author, whatever the paperwork says. Marcus listened to the whole thing. When it finished, he reached down and knocked his knuckle twice against the shin of the leg. Hollow sound. Old friend. The first one I ever fit him 11 weeks into 2011, 2 years after the blast, took the real one. In front of the room, he said. Not a deposition. The room. The room, I said. Here's the thing I hadn't decided until that porch. I wasn't going to sue first. A lawsuit is a locked door too. It's slow and it's private, and it lets a man like Julian tell his version for 18 months before anyone sees a photograph.
No.
I wanted him confident. I wanted him to walk up those stairs one more time and reach for the same joke so the room could watch it happen and watch it come apart in the same breath. Priya called it letting him load the gun. She'd secured 2 seats for Aldervant at the investor gala, herself and 1 associate, badges and all. Trevor's people didn't know what she did for a living. They would. Wednesday, I called Owen. Owen runs AV for half the hotels in Fresno and owes me nothing except that I made a hand for his brother-in-law in 2014 and never charged the second fitting. He met me at the Fairmont at 7 in the morning before the setup cruise and let me stand at the podium in an empty ballroom. The house laptop feeds the main screen, he said, tapping the lectern. But there's a second input here. HDMI. If a guest presenter has their own device, we cut to it from the board and back. My guy runs the board. And if someone at the head table tries to kill the projector mid-slide? Owen looked at me for a second. The breaker's backstage. Nobody at a table can touch it. And my guy won't cut a feed unless I tell him. He handed me a small clicker. Test it. I stood at that podium in the dark and pressed the button. The R came up on the screen 20 feet tall, the gear teeth sharp as a saw. My hands were steady. I had checked. That mattered to me, that when the moment came, I would not be shaking. I ran the line out loud, once, to the empty chairs, just to hear how it sat in my mouth. Then I clicked the screen black and drove home. Thursday night Julian was waiting up. He'd poured 2 glasses of wine. He'd changed into the soft gray sweater I bought him years ago, the one he wears when he wants to look like a man you can trust. He took my hand across the counter, both of his around it warm. I've been an idiot, he said quietly. This whole thing, the lawyers, the paperwork, it got away from us. I don't want to fight my wife. I want you beside me tomorrow. On the stage. Let people see us how we actually are. A family that built something together. He rubbed his thumb over my knuckles. The wine smelled like the first bottle we ever split in the garage, sitting on paint cans, back in 2003 when he was 30, and I believed every word. Forget the misunderstanding, he said. Stand with me. I let him hold my hand. I let the silence go 3 seconds long. Then I smiled and told him I would. In the pocket of my dress, my fingers were already closed around the USB. The ballroom smelled the same as it had 10 years running. Warm champagne, floor wax, the faint perfume of 200 people who had all dressed to be seen. I stood where Julian had asked me to stand, half a step behind his right shoulder, on the little riser they used for the annual toast. Owen caught my eye from the sound booth at the back and gave me the smallest nod. The laptop was ready. My slides were cued. All he needed was the word. Julian tapped his glass with a fork. The room quieted the way rooms do for him. 10 years ago, he began, I had a drawing and a dream and no money. He had a drawing. I looked at the carpet, and I let myself remember the real one. The graphite ground into my thumb, the ankle joint I'd redrawn 9 times at the kitchen table while he slept. He told the story he always told. The late nights, the breakthrough with the ankle joint, the moment he realized the field had been thinking about gait all wrong. Trevor Lance sat at the front table with 2 men I didn't know, both in the flat gray suits of people who move money for a living. The medical board's regional chair, a woman named Halloran, sat one table over with her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. And of course, Julian said, warm, easy, I couldn't have built the first units without my wife. Renata is very good with her hands. A pause for the smile. The girl who carved plastic legs down in our garage. The laughter came. Softer this year. But it came. I let it finish. Then I stepped up beside him and touched his sleeve, the way a wife does, and I spoke into the edge of his microphone. Before we toast, I said, I brought a few keepsake photos. From the beginning. Do you mind? Something flickered behind his eyes. But 200 people were watching, and a man who has just called his wife charming cannot refuse her in front of the room. He spread his hand toward the screen. Generous. Please. I looked back at Owen. I said, go ahead. The first image filled the wall. A pencil sketch. Cross-section of an ankle joint, my handwriting crowding the margins, and in the corner the date stamped the camera burns in. February 2011. 5 years before the clinic existed. That's an early concept, Julian said, still smiling, but he'd taken a half step toward the riser's edge.
The slide changed.
A photograph of my hands holding the first raw prototype, carbon still rough, clamped in the vise on the Delano Street bench. The date in the corner.
Then the next.
Then the next, the workbench, the failed sockets lined up like teeth, my thumb over a bevel I'd cut by hand. The room had gone very quiet. I could hear the ice settling in someone's glass. Renata. Julian's hand found my elbow. His fingers were tight. Under the stage lights, I could see the sweat starting at his hairline. This isn't the time. I didn't move. One more, I said. The screen filled with a macro shot, so close the pixels softened at the edges, the inside of a joint cavity, and stamped into the metal, no bigger than a grain of rice, a letter, our wound into the teeth of a gear. That's a maker's mark, I told the room, and my voice did not shake. I've hidden one inside every device I've ever built. Every single one. You can't see it unless you open the joint. Julian let go of my elbow and stepped down off the riser fast, toward the back wall, toward the booth. Kill the feed, he said. Not to me. To the room, to anyone. This is a malfunction.
Owen.
Cut the projector. The screen went black. For a second there was only the hum of the dead projector fan and the sound of Julian breathing into the live microphone he'd forgotten he was still holding. Then a chair scraped back at table 9. I knew that scrape. I'd been listening for it for 4 days. Marcus Bell stood. He was in his good jacket, the navy one, and he came up the center aisle slow, and even the gait I built for him, the gait I know better than my own walk. People turned. He reached the front of the room and stopped in the light where the screen had been. My name is Marcus Bell, he said. Staff Sergeant, retired. I lost my leg below the knee in 2009. He looked at Julian not unkindly. I've never met this man in my life. He set his foot on the empty chair at the head table. He rolled his trouser cuff to the knee. He reached down, and with the ease of someone who has done it 10,000 times, he opened the access panel on the side of the joint. Bring the lights, Marcus said. Halloran was already on her feet. She came around the table with her reading glasses down now, and she bent over his ankle, and the whole room leaned with her. She straightened slowly. She looked at me. Then she looked at Julian. There's an R, she said, in a gear. This leg was fitted in March of 2011, Marcus said. I've walked on it for 15 years. She made it.
He nodded at me. In a garage.
Before there was any clinic to put a name on. Nobody laughed now. Nobody moved. 200 people, and I could have heard a pin drop onto the carpet. Julian stood alone in the middle of it, the microphone hanging at his side, his mouth working around a beginning he couldn't find. I walked down off the riser. I crossed to him. I stopped close enough that only the mic between us could carry it, and then I lifted my chin so the room could hear it too. Ideas don't leave fingerprints, Dr. Cole. I let it land. But hands do. He didn't answer. He was looking past me at Trevor Lance, and so I turned to look too. Trevor had not said a word through any of it. He sat with his fingers laced, watching the black screen as though the images were still on it. Then, slowly, he pushed his chair back and stood. He set his glass down on the white tablecloth, deliberate, soundless. The two gray suits beside him did not move. He looked at Julian. Not at me. At Julian. The date on that photograph, Trevor said, or the date you told me.
He paused.
Which one is real? The room didn't answer him. That was the sound I remembered most afterward. Not gasping, not shouting. 100 people deciding at once not to laugh. Trevor Lance set his glass down on the linen. The stem clicked. He buttoned his jacket the way men do when they've decided to leave a building forever. Julian, he said, quiet enough that people leaned in. My fund has a fraud clause. It isn't a suggestion. He looked at me, then back at Julian. You'll hear from our counsel Monday. He walked out. 2 other investors followed him, and then the room came apart into low voices and chairs scraping stone. By Wednesday, the money was gone. I know the exact number because Dana forwarded me the wire reversal, $11.2 million in committed capital, withdrawn in 4 days. I read it twice at my kitchen table, then set the phone face down and finished my coffee. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. The medical board moved slower, the way institutions do when they're being careful. Halloran called me herself on a Tuesday morning. She had the flat voice of someone reading from a form. Ms. Cole, the board has opened a formal inquiry into misattribution of a Class 2 device and into a patent application we now believe contains false inventorship dates. Dr. Cole's clinical privileges are suspended pending outcome. A pause. Your photographs are timestamped February 2011. His filing claims conception in 2015. Those 2 things can't both be true. No, I said. They can't. Here is the part nobody warned me would feel strange. When the patent examiner voided Julian's application, when the letter came citing my dated images and Marcus's device records as prior art, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired in a specific place behind my eyes, the way I used to feel at 2 a.m. in the garage on Delano when a socket finally seated true after 6 failed pours. Julian lost the clinic in stages. First the lease flag. Then the licensing board pulled the Cole Dynamic Ankles clearance pending review. Then the landlord changed the locks on the Fresno unit, and I heard from Dana that the front desk plant, a big philodendron I'd repotted a dozen times, sat on a sidewalk in its pot until someone took it.
Dramatized.
She came to Aldervent first, sat across from Priya and me in a glass conference room that smelled like new carpet, and put a single condition on the table before she'd sign anything. Immunity, she said. In writing. I copied files I wasn't authorized to copy. I'm not going down for keeping myself safe. She folded her hands. And I want the job you offered. The real one. With the equity in the actual document this time. Priya slid a folder across. Both are in there. Dana read every page. Of course she did. Then she signed, and when she looked up her eyes were wet in a way she clearly hated. He promised me 4%, she said. For 3 years he told me I was going to be a partner. I planned my life around a sentence he never meant. She wiped her face once, briskly. Where do you want me Monday? That was Dana Hole, loyal to whoever paid the debt she was owed. I couldn't judge her for it. I'd been owed one too. I filed for divorce on a Thursday. My lawyer, a calm woman named Reyes, asked if I wanted to seek damages beyond the settlement. I said I wanted my name and I wanted out in that order and nothing else. She wrote it down without comment. Julian called me 11 days after the gala. I let it ring twice before I answered, standing in my new lab with a half-finished pylon clamped in the vise. Renata.
His voice had changed.
Not softer, thinner. I've been thinking. This has gotten out of hand for both of us.
A breath.
The design files. The parametric models on the old server. I need access restored. There are patients mid-treatment, and I'm the only one who... You're suspended, Julian. Temporarily. Quick, defensive. When this clears, I'll need to keep the device viable. You still have the source directory. Just give me the credentials, and we can. I stood there listening to the man ask, without a flicker of shame, for the keys to the thing he'd spent 10 years telling a room I couldn't have built. You called to get back in? I said. Not to say you were sorry. Silence. Then, coldly. I don't know what you want me to say. Nothing. That's the point. I ended the call.
Set the phone on the bench.
Went back to the vise and the pylon and the small good sound of a file finding metal. Marcus stopped by that Friday. He walked the length of my new shop. The racks, the ovens, the diagnostic rig still in its shipping foam, and he was smiling the whole way, unhurried, at peace with all of it. You did it clean, he said. In front of everybody. Like I asked.
You did it, I said.
You stood up. He shrugged. Easy. I just showed them my leg. He knocked twice on the socket, that hollow knock I knew by heart. Your leg. Built in 2011. Marked with your stamp. Right where you left it. I was still laughing when my phone lit up. Eleanor. I almost didn't answer. I hadn't spoken to her since the box of drawings, since her whispered warning at the door. I stepped out to the parking lot. The evening was warm. Eleanor. She was crying. Not the quiet kind. The kind that has been building for days. Renata, she said, and her voice broke on my name. I need to ask you something, and I'm terrified of the answer. A ragged breath. After everything he did, everything I couldn't stop, do you still let me be family? Am I still allowed? I stood in the parking lot with the phone against my ear and no idea, yet, what I was going to say. The lab smelled like cured resin and coffee at 7 in the morning, and for the first time in my life the name on the door was mine. Renata Cole Prosthetics. Aldervan had it etched in frosted glass, small, tasteful, exactly the way I'd asked. Priya walked me through on the first day, pointed at the sign, and said, "We spelled it right?" I told her they had. I stood there longer than I meant to, holding a badge with my own face on it. The bench was better than anything I'd had in the garage on Delano. Real ventilation. A carver that didn't scream. But my hands moved the same way they always had, and that surprised me, that the work had never belonged to the room it happened in. Marcus came in on a Tuesday. He was my first public patient, and he'd insisted on that word, public. No back door, he said, easing into the fitting chair, rolling up the leg of his jeans the way he had in front of 200 people at the Fairmont. You already made me do it once. Might as well make it a habit. I laughed. I hadn't laughed in a fitting room in years. I took the measurements slow. His residual limb had changed since 2011. Everyone's does, and I told him so, and he said, "Then make me a better one." The old leg sat on the bench between us, that first leg, worn soft in the socket by more than a decade of walking. I opened the joint one last time. There it was. The R laced into a gear, hidden where no one would ever look, the mark I'd carved because I needed one person in the world to know who made a thing, even if that person was only me at 2 in the morning. "I want to keep it," Marcus said, watching me. "The old one. Museum piece." "It's yours," I said. "It always was. You've had it since your first fitting, back in 2011. 11 weeks I made you wait, remember?" "I remember," he said. "Worth it. When I built the new one, I did something I had never done in 20 years of this work. I put the mark on the outside, right along the anterior shell, small but plain, where the light catches it, the R and the gear, no longer buried in the joint." Marcus ran his thumb over it when I fit him. "Feels different," he said, knowing it's there. "It was always there," I said. "It's just not hiding now." He stood. He walked the length of the room, turned, walked back, and there was nothing in his gait to fix. He stopped in front of me and didn't say thank you, which I appreciated because we were past that. He said, "Who's next?" There was a wait list. That still didn't feel real. Eleanor called on Sundays. She was 72 and she kept her word about that every week, and I let her. I want to be honest, there was a version of me that would have let the phone ring. But she had handed me a box of my own drawings from 2009 when it cost her everything to do it, and she had asked me, that night in her kitchen, not to let this turn me into what her son had become. So I answered. "Is he? Do you hear from him?" she asked once, careful. "No," I said. And I didn't add what I could have added, that the last time Julian's number lit up my screen, he hadn't called to say he was sorry. He'd called to ask for access to the design files, the way you'd ask a locksmith for a spare key to a house you'd already lost. I let him go to voicemail, and I never listened to it. Some silences you keep on purpose. That was the thing I kept turning over, those first months in the new lab. For 20 years I had been quiet, and I told myself it was for the marriage, for the family, for the work we were building together. And some of that quiet had been generous. But somewhere along the way the quiet stopped protecting the peace, and started erasing me. There's a silence that keeps a house calm. And there's a silence that lets someone else's name dry on top of yours like paint. I know the difference now. It cost me a marriage to learn it. Dana settled in 2 benches down, running intake, sharp as ever, finally with the title she'd been promised in writing this time. She stopped by my station one afternoon with a warranty card, the kind she used to file at the clinic, and set it on my bench without a word. Under manufacturer it read in plain type, Renata Cole. She tapped it once and walked off. I taped it to the wall above the carver. It's still there. Marcus sent me a photo in the spring. He'd climbed a ridge outside Clovis, phone held out at arm's length, the new leg planted on rock, and in the corner of the frame, catching the sun, you could just make out the mark. He captioned it, "They can see it from here." I sit at that bench most mornings now before anyone comes in and I carve. The R, the gear, on the outside, where the light finds it. I gave 20 years of my hands to a man who called them nothing on a stage and let a room full of people laugh. I don't regret the work. I only regret how long I let someone else sign it. Never again. Not my hands. Not my name.